911, what's your emergency? We need help at OceanWorld Miami now. The 7 tank. Oh my god. Sarah's underwater. Tycoon won't let her go. He's dragging her down. Sir, I need you to stay calm. You said someone is underwater? She's been under for over a minute. The orca, he's got her ponytail? Please send everyone. Sarah. In the gleaming performance stadium of OceanWorld Miami, beneath a scorching Florida sun that would reach 94 degrees that August afternoon, what began as a routine Friday training session would become a nightmare that shattered the marine entertainment industry forever. Sarah Chen was 28 years old, a rising star in the elite world of marine mammal training. She had just gotten engaged 3 weeks earlier. Her Instagram still glowing with photos of the beachside proposal, her radiant smile captured against the sunset as she showed off the ring. She had no idea that in less than 4 minutes, she would be fighting for her life against a 12,000-pound predator she had called her best friend. The morning of August 15, 2019, started like any other at OceanWorld Miami. The maintenance crew had arrived at 5 a.m., checking chlorine levels and water temperature. The prep team had thawed 450 pounds of restaurant-quality herring, salmon, and mackerel. Sarah had arrived at 6:30 a.m., her signature pink water bottle in hand, greeting everyone with the enthusiasm that made her beloved among staff. She'd even brought donuts for the crew, Boston cream, everyone's favorite. But something was different that morning. Tycoon, the 22-foot-long orca that Sarah had worked with for 3 years, had been off his food for 2. He'd been swimming in tight, aggressive circles. The night crew had noted unusual vocalizations, long, low-frequency calls that veteran trainers recognized as warnings. Signs that, in retrospect, screamed danger. This is Sarah Chen's story. A story of trust betrayed, of the deadly miscalculation of keeping apex predators in captivity, and the moment when the illusion of control was shattered in front of 2,500 horrified spectators. A story that would end not just a promising young life, but an era of human arrogance about our relationship with nature's most intelligent killers. You're watching Animal Attack Files, where we bring you the most shocking real-life animal encounters from around the world. If this story grips you, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because what you're about to witness will change how you see marine parks forever. This isn't just another trainer accident. This is the tragedy that exposed decades of lies, cover-ups, and the dark truth about what happens when we force ocean predators to perform for our entertainment. Sarah Chen wasn't just another marine trainer working for a paycheck. She was the trainer every rookie wanted to become, the one management pointed to during corporate presentations, the face that appeared on OceanWorld Miami's billboards along Interstate 95. In an industry where turnover was high and burnout was common, Sarah had something different, an almost mystical connection with the animals that even skeptical veterans couldn't explain. Born on March 12, 1991, in San Francisco's Richmond district, Sarah grew up in a cramped apartment above her parents' struggling restaurant, the Golden Dragon. Her father, Michael Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan in 1985 with nothing but $40 and a determination to build something in America. Her mother, Linda, followed 2 years later, pregnant with Sarah's older brother, David. The family of 4 shared 900 square feet, but what they lacked in space, they made up for in dreams. Sarah's obsession with marine life began at age 7 during a school field trip to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. While other kids ran screaming through the exhibits, Sarah stood transfixed at the kelp forest display for 3 straight hours. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, found her with her small hands pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her face. "They're dancing," Sarah had whispered, watching the leopard sharks glide through the towering kelp. "They're dancing just for me." Mrs. Rodriguez later told Sarah's parents it was the most profound moment she'd witnessed in 20 years of teaching. Her parents, practical immigrants who valued stability over passion, initially dismissed their daughter's obsession as a phase. Michael Chen wanted Sarah to become a doctor or an engineer, something respectable, something that would justify their sacrifices. But Sarah's determination was oceanic in its depth. She volunteered at the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito every weekend through high school, waking at 4 a.m. to catch 3 buses for the 2-hour journey. She spent her nights reading every marine biology book the library had, teaching herself Latin names for species while her classmates studied for SATs. Friends describe Sarah as someone who lived in 2 worlds simultaneously. Jessica Martinez, who knew Sarah for 15 years, recalls their teenage years with vivid clarity. She'd be at a party, physically present, laughing at jokes, but you could see her mind was elsewhere. She'd suddenly grab your arm and start explaining how dolphins echolocate, or why orcas are actually the largest dolphins, not whales. She'd get this light in her eyes that was absolutely infectious. You couldn't help but care about whatever she was saying, even if you didn't understand half of it. But it was Sarah's empathy that truly set her apart. She had an almost supernatural ability to sense emotional states in both animals and humans. Her college roommate at UC San Diego, where Sarah majored in marine biology with a minor in psychology, remembers the night Sarah predicted their professor's divorce 3 months before it happened. She said she could see it in how he held his coffee cup differently, how his laugh had changed pitch. She noticed everything. That's what made her so good with the orcas. She could read them like they were books written in a language only she understood. Sarah's relationship with her family was complex but loving. Her father never fully understood her career choice, even as she rose through the ranks at OceanWorld. During family dinners, he'd introduce her as "my daughter who plays with fish," a description that both hurt and amused Sarah. But when she called home every Sunday, he'd spend hours listening to her stories about Taikuin's latest breakthrough or a new training technique she'd developed. Her mother, Linda, kept every newspaper clipping, every photo, every program from Sarah's shows in a series of meticulously organized scrapbooks. "My daughter, the mermaid," she'd tell customers at the restaurant, beaming with pride she struggled to articulate in English. Sarah's professional journey to OceanWorld Miami began immediately after graduation. She turned down a full scholarship for a master's program at Stanford to accept an entry-level position. At the park, her professors were horrified. Dr. Robert Kellerman, her thesis advisor, tried to talk her out of it during a 3-hour meeting. "You're brilliant," he'd said. "You could be conducting groundbreaking research, publishing papers, making real contributions to marine science." Sarah's response was characteristic of her philosophy: "I don't want to study them from a distance. I want to know them, really know them." She started as a food prep assistant, spending 8 months cutting fish and hosing down concrete before she was even allowed near the animals. But Sarah never complained. She arrived first, left last, and spent her breaks studying each orca's behavioral patterns through the underwater viewing windows. She kept detailed journals, later found in her locker, documenting every tail slap, every vocalization, every interaction between the pod members. By the time she was promoted to assistant trainer, she knew more about each individual orca than some trainers who'd been there for years. Her rise through the ranks was meteoric. Within 18 months, she was working directly with the orcas. Within 3 years, she was lead trainer for Taikuin, OceanWorld's largest and most challenging male. The previous lead trainer, Marcus Thompson, had requested a transfer after Taikuin had grabbed his ankle during a show, holding him underwater for 45 seconds. But Sarah saw something different in the massive orca. "He's not aggressive," she told the Miami Herald in what would become a tragically ironic interview. "He's misunderstood. He's trying to communicate, and we're just not listening properly." Yet those who knew Sarah best would later say there were signs she was too trusting, too willing to anthropomorphize these apex predators. Her fiancé, Robert Park, a software engineer she'd met at a coffee shop near the park, noticed she'd started having nightmares in the weeks before the She'd wake up gasping, clutching at her throat, but she'd dismiss his concerns. "It's just stress from the new show routine," she'd say, but Robert noticed she'd started wearing her grandmother's jade pendant, something she only did when she felt she needed protection. Orcas are the ocean's apex predators, creatures of such intelligence and power that indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest called them kakuk, the demons of the sea. In the wild, they roam up to 100 miles a day, dive to depths of 500 feet, and live in complex matriarchal societies with their own dialects, hunting strategies passed down through generations, and cultural traditions unique to each pod. They possess brains 4 times larger than humans, with a more complex emotional processing center. In captivity, these magnificent beings, evolved over millions of years to rule the open ocean, are confined to concrete pools roughly the equivalent of a bathtub to a human. The orca that would change Sarah Chen's life forever was born not in the vast Pacific, but in a tank at Sea Life San Antonio on February 9, 1997. It was named Taikuin, meaning typhoon, in Japanese, a name chosen through an online poll that drew 50,000 votes. His mother, Katina, was herself captive-born, making Taikuin second-generation captive, an orca who had never known the ocean, never heard the songs of wild pods, never learned the ancient hunting traditions of his kind. He was, in essence, a 12,000-pound predator stripped of everything that made orcas what they truly are, reduced to a performer in a chlorinated stage. Taikuin's early years were marked by what marine parks call normal adjustment issues, a euphemism for severe psychological distress. Age 2. He was separated from his mother and transferred to OceanWorld, Ohio, where he spent 3 years in isolation with only dolphins for company. Former trainer Janet Richardson, who worked with Taikuin during this period, described him as profoundly depressed. He would float motionless at the surface for hours, Richardson later testified in a deposition. Sometimes he'd rake his teeth against the concrete walls until his gums bled. We were instructed to document this as normal exploratory behavior. At age 5, Taikuin was moved to OceanWorld Miami as part of their breeding program. He was intended to mate with their females, but Taikuin showed little interest. Instead, he developed what park officials called behavioral quirks. He would swim in repetitive patterns, figure eights, that he'd trace for 12 hours straight. He began regurgitating his food and playing with it, a behavior never observed in wild orcas. Disturbingly, he started what trainers quietly referred to as targeting, fixing his gaze on specific trainers and following their movements with an intensity that made even experienced staff uncomfortable. Sarah first encountered Taikuin on her 3rd day at OceanWorld Miami. She was observing a training session from the underwater viewing area, when Taikuin suddenly broke from his routine, swam directly to the window, and stationed himself inches from the glass where Sarah stood. For 13 minutes, she timed it. The massive orca remained motionless, his dark eye locked on hers. Other trainers found it unsettling. Sarah found it magical. "He chose me," she wrote in her journal that night. "I could feel him looking not at me but into me, like he was reading my soul." For 3 years, Sarah and Taikuin developed what appeared to be an extraordinary bond. She was the only trainer who could reliably get him to perform certain behaviors. When Taikuin refused food from others, Sarah could coax him to eat. When he became agitated during thunderstorms, a common trigger for captive orcas, Sarah's presence alone could calm him. Park management showcased their relationship in promotional materials. "The Girl Who Speaks Whale," read one billboard. Videos of Sarah and Taikuin's water dances went viral, accumulating millions of views. Tour groups were told the heartwarming story of their special friendship. But experts outside the entertainment industry were increasingly concerned. Dr. Ingrid Visser, a New Zealand orca researcher with 30 years of field experience, visited OceanWorld Miami 6 months before the incident as part of an independent assessment. Her report, which park management tried to suppress through legal action, was damning. Taikuin displays severe psychological disturbance consistent with chronic stress and confinement psychosis, Dr. Visser wrote. His hyperfocus on specific trainers, particularly Ms. Chen, is not affection, it's a fixation that could indicate predatory interest. In the wild, orcas are selective hunters. In captivity, denied their natural prey and hunting behaviors, that instinct doesn't disappear. It redirects. Dr. Visser warned Sarah directly during a tense meeting in the park's administrative offices. "You're not his friend," Visser told her, according to notes from the meeting obtained through a Freedom of Information request. "To him, you might be something else entirely. These animals are not domesticated. They're not even truly tamed. They're psychologically broken beings doing what they must to survive in an impossible situation. And broken things are unpredictable." Sarah's response, according to the notes, was polite but dismissive. She thanked Dr. Visser for her concern, but insisted that outsiders couldn't understand the bonds formed through daily interaction. The warning signs escalated dramatically in the 3 months before the attack. On May 10, Tycoon grabbed trainer Michael Rodriguez's wetsuit during a routine medical check, refusing to release him for nearly 2 minutes. Management classified it as playful behavior. On June 3, Tycoon breached unexpectedly during a show, landing partially on the platform where Sarah stood, missing her by inches. Slow-motion analysis of visitor footage showed this was not a mistimed jump. Tycoon had adjusted his trajectory mid-air. Sarah herself seemed shaken by the incident, but in her performance review the next day, she wrote, "Tycoon was just excited. He's been cooped up due to the storm season. He needs more stimulation." On July 20th, less than a month before the fatal encounter, something happened that should have been the final warning. During an evening training session with only staff present, Tycoon performed what trainers call a jaw pop directly at Sarah, a behavior where the orca snaps its jaws shut with tremendous force, creating a sound like a gunshot. In the wild, this is an aggressive warning, often preceding an attack. The more disturbing was what happened next. According to trainer Beth Williams, who witnessed the incident, Tycoon then swam to the platform, opened his mouth, and held it open for nearly 30 seconds while staring at Sarah. "It was like he was showing her his teeth," Williams later said. "Like he wanted her to see exactly what he could do." Internal emails obtained during the investigation revealed that several trainers requested Tycoon be removed from public shows. Senior trainer Marcus Thompson wrote to management on July 25, "Tycoon's behavior is escalating. He's testing boundaries in ways I've never seen in my 15 years here. Sarah Chen is too emotionally invested to see it. We need to intervene before someone gets hurt." The response from OceanWorld's Vice President of Operations, Thomas Brandenburg, was brief. "Tycoon and Sarah are our biggest draw. Shows continue as scheduled. Increase safety protocols as you see fit." The safety protocols Thompson implemented were minimal: an extra spotter during shows and a requirement that Sarah maintain 3 feet of distance from the pool edge when Tycoon was unrestrained. But these measures were based on a fundamental misunderstanding. They assumed Tycoon was merely displaying dominance behaviors common in captive males. What they failed to recognize was that Tycoon had been exhibiting something far more dangerous: the calculated patience of a predator studying its prey. Still, Sarah refused to see the danger. In her final blog post, published the night before the attack, she wrote, "People ask me if I'm ever scared of Tycoon. The answer is no. Fear has no place in our relationship. We trust each other completely. Tomorrow we're debuting a new synchronized swimming routine that's going to blow everyone's minds. Tycoon's been practicing so hard. He wants to make me proud." That's what people don't understand about orcas. They're not just intelligent. They're emotional. They love, they grieve, they form friendships. Tycoon is my proof that humans and orcas can coexist in harmony. The post received 47,000 likes and 3,000 comments. Many were from fans expressing excitement about the new routine. But buried among them were warnings from former trainers, marine biologists, and activists. One comment, from a user claiming to be a former OceanWorld employee, was particularly prophetic. "Sarah, please be careful. Tycoon isn't who you think he is." None of them are. The ocean doesn't forget what we've stolen from it. In the 4 weeks leading up to August 15th, the atmosphere at OceanWorld Miami shifted in ways that even tourists could sense. Something was wrong in the kingdom of manufactured happiness. The orcas were vocalizing at frequencies that made the glass in the underwater viewing areas vibrate. Tycoon had begun a behavior that chilled experienced trainers. He would position himself vertically in the water, a behavior called spy hopping, but instead of briefly surveying his surroundings as orcas normally do, he would maintain the position for up to 10 minutes, his massive head towering 8 feet above the surface, absolutely motionless, his eyes tracking Sarah's every movement as she prepared for shows on the Dr. Kenneth Bauer, a cetacean behavioral specialist who reviewed security footage as part of the investigation, noticed something that others had. Tycoon wasn't just watching Sarah, he was timing her. If you analyze the footage systematically, Dr. Bauer explained in his deposition, you can see Tycoon was learning her routines, her patterns. He knew that she always knelt at the pool's edge at 2:15 p.m. to test the water temperature. He knew she would lean over to retrieve the training whistle she'd drop, seemingly accidentally but actually as part of her bond building routine at the beginning of each session. He was studying her vulnerabilities. Neighbors of Sarah's apartment complex in Coconut Grove began noticing changes in her behavior. Maria Gonzalez, who lived in the unit below, reported that Sarah had started pacing at night. I could hear her walking back and forth, sometimes until 3 or 4 a.m. She'd never done that before. Sometimes I'd hear her on the phone, and while I couldn't make out the words, her voice sounded different, higher, stressed. The building's security footage showed Sarah arriving home later each night, often sitting in her car for 20 or 30 minutes before going inside, her face illuminated by her phone screen as she obsessively reviewed videos of Tycoon. Sarah's fiancé, Robert Park, tried multiple times to intervene. During a dinner at their favorite restaurant on August 1st, he presented her with printed emails from concerned marine biologists around the world who had seen the viral videos of her performances. "Baby, these aren't cranks," he pleaded. "These are PhDs, people with decades of experience. They're all saying the same thing. Tycoon is displaying pre-attack behaviors." Sarah's response was to accuse Robert of jealousy. "You've never understood my work," she said, according to Robert's testimony. "Tycoon and I have something special, and you can't stand that I love something else as much as I love you." She left the restaurant in tears, and they didn't speak for 3 days. OceanWorld's internal communications during this period, subpoenaed during the wrongful death lawsuit, paint a picture of an organization in denial. On August 5th, head trainer Marcus Thompson sent a video to upper management showing Tycoon ramming the metal gate of the medical pool with such force that it bent the reinforced steel bars. The orca had been placed there for a routine health check but became agitated when he could hear but not see Sarah conducting a training session in the main pool. Thompson's email read, "This is the 3rd gate he's damaged this. Maintenance is concerned about structural integrity. More importantly, this level of aggression is unprecedented. Recommend immediate behavioral intervention." The response from Thomas Brandenburg, VP of Operations, came within an hour. Replace gates with reinforced model. Charge to facility. Maintenance budget. No changes to show schedule. Sarah, Chen, and Tycoon are featured in next month's National Geographic documentary. Behavioral modifications will be addressed after filming. This decision would later become a central point in the criminal negligence charges filed against OceanWorld management. But perhaps the most chilling warnings came from an unexpected source, the other orcas. OceanWorld Miami housed 4 other orcas besides Tycoon, and their behavior in the 2 weeks before the attack was unprecedented. Nalani, the matriarch of the pod, began separating herself from Tycoon, refusing to swim in the same section of the pool. She would position herself between Tycoon and the younger orcas, a protective behavior, typically seen only when defending calves from predators. Mako and Coral, 2 younger females, began exhibiting what marine biologists call displacement vocalizations, high-pitched warning calls that wild orcas use to alert their pod to danger. Dr. Patricia Young, a marine acoustics expert who analyzed the underwater recordings, found something extraordinary. The other orcas were essentially ostracizing Taikuan. They were treating him not as a pod member but as a threat. In the wild, this behavior is reserved for rogue orcas, who have violated pod protocol in severe ways, typically through violence against pod members. These orcas knew something was going to happen. Sarah's personal journal, recovered from her locker, shows she was aware of these changes but interpreted them differently. Her entry from August 10th reads, "Taikuan seems lonely. The others are being cruel to him, especially Nalani. She won't let him near during feeding time. At me with such sadness. I'm the only one who understands him, the only one who doesn't judge him for being different. Tomorrow I'm going to spend extra time with him, maybe do some of his favorite trust exercises. He needs to know he's loved." On August 12th, just 3 days before the attack, something happened that wasn't reported in the official incident logs but was captured on a visitor's phone. During the 3 p.m. show, as Sarah was performing a trust fall into the pool, a routine where she would fall backward from the platform and Taikuan would catch her, the orca instead dove deep and circled beneath her. Sarah hit the water hard and for a moment disappeared beneath the surface. When she emerged, gasping, Taikuan was spy-hopping directly behind her, his massive jaws less than a foot from her head. The audience applauded, thinking it was part of the show. Sarah, visibly shaken, continued the performance, but her smile never quite reached her eyes for the rest of the routine. That evening, Sarah did something she'd never done before. She called Dr. Ingrid Visser, the orca researcher who had warned her months earlier. The call lasted 43 minutes. According to Dr. Visser's notes, Sarah was audibly distressed and asked theoretical questions about orca behavior. She wanted to know if orcas could feel jealousy, if they could plan, if they understood the concept of death, Dr. Visser recalled. I told her yes to all three. There was a long silence, then she asked, but they wouldn't hurt someone they loved, would they? I told her that orcas don't love humans. They can't. We're not their species. At best, we're entertaining diversions. At worst, we're threats or prey. She hung up without saying goodbye. The next day, August 13th, Sarah called in sick, the first time in her 3 years at OceanWorld. Her co-workers were shocked. Sarah had worked through flu, through a sprained ankle, even the day after her grandmother's funeral. Marcus Thompson later testified that he received a text from Sarah that day, "I need to think. Something's different with Taikuan. Maybe I've been wrong about everything." Thompson replied immediately, "Stay home tomorrow too. Let's reassess Monday." Sarah's response came 3 hours later, "No. I have a show Thursday. Taikuan expects me. Can't let him down." On the morning of August 14th, the day before the attack, maintenance worker Carlos Mendoza was first to arrive at the ORCA Stadium. Something that made his blood run cold. Taikuan had somehow retrieved one of Sarah's training whistles. She thought she'd lost it days ago, and had positioned it at the edge of the pool where Sarah always stood. "It was like bait," Mendoza later said. "Like when my cat brings me dead birds. A trophy. Or a lure. I moved it before anyone else saw, but it gave me chills." The final warning came just hours before the attack. On the morning of August 15th, as Sarah prepared for the noon show, she found Taikuan floating motionless in the center of the pool, his eyes closed. This behavior, called logging, is normal for wild orcas but concerning in captive ones, as it often indicates severe psychological distress. When Sarah approached, calling his name, Taikuan's eyes snapped open. According to spotter James Wright, who was watching from the observation deck, what happened next was subtle but significant. Taikuan smiled, Wright said. "I know. That sounds crazy, but orcas can manipulate their facial features." He pulled his lips back, showing all his teeth. It wasn't playful. It was anticipatory. Like he'd made a decision. Still, Sarah refused to cancel the show. 2,500 tickets had been sold. The National Geographic film crew was setting up their cameras. The show, marketed as Sarah and Taikuin, A Love Deeper Than the Ocean, was scheduled to begin at noon. Sarah spent the remaining hour in the backstage area, applying waterproof makeup, checking her wetsuit, and reviewing the routine one final time. Security footage shows her standing at the mirror, taking deep breaths, her hands trembling slightly as she attached her hair in the high ponytail that had become her signature look, the same ponytail that, in less than an hour, would become the instrument of her doom. Thursday, August 15, 2019, 11:47 a.m. The temperature had already reached 91 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity at 78%, making the air feel thick and oppressive. The noon show at OceanWorld Miami's ORCA Stadium was completely sold out, 2,500 seats filled with families, tourists, summer camp groups, and the National Geographic documentary crew who had positioned 6 cameras at strategic angles around the pool. The water in the main performance tank sparkled under the intense Florida sun, its chemically treated surface hiding the 36-foot depth where shadows moved like storm clouds. Sarah Chen stood in the trainer preparation area, making final adjustments to her black and turquoise wetsuit. She had performed this routine 847 times over 3 years, but today her hands shook slightly as she zipped up the suit. She applied a fresh coat of zinc oxide to her nose and cheeks. The Florida sun was merciless on the water, and secured her hair in the high ponytail that had become her trademark. The ponytail holder was a gift from her mother, a silver band with small jade stones that caught the light. She always wore it for important shows. Taikuin was already in the main pool, having been moved from the holding tank at 6 a.m. He had eaten only half his morning feed, 180 pounds of herring instead of his usual 300. Trainer Beth Williams, who had overseen the feeding, noted in the log that Taikuin seemed distracted and restless, repeatedly spy-hopping to look toward the trainer platform where Sarah would eventually appear. He had been swimming in a counterclockwise pattern for the past 2 hours, completing exactly 12 circuits before pausing at the main stage, then resuming. Repetitive behavior, known as stereotypy, is a sign of psychological distress in captive animals, but it had become so common among ocean worlds orcas that it was no longer flagged as concerning. At approximately 11:52 a.m., Sarah emerged from the preparation area and walked toward the performance platform. She stopped briefly to speak with Marcus Thompson, the senior trainer who was serving as safety spotter for the show. According to Thompson's later testimony, Sarah seemed unusually quiet and asked him twice if he had the emergency equipment ready. She specifically asked about the CO2 canisters. Thompson recalled, referring to the devices used to create a loud noise that could startle an orca into releasing a trainer. I assured her everything was in place. She nodded but didn't look convinced. The audience was buzzing with excitement. Many had planned their vacations specifically around seeing the famous Sarah Chen and Taikuin perform. A group of marine biology students from the University of Miami sat in the front row, notebooks ready. 8-year-old Madison Hughes, celebrating her birthday, wore an orca costume her grandmother had made. The National Geographic producer, Jennifer Blackwood, was giving last-minute instructions to her camera operators. Remember, we want to capture the bond between them. Focus on the moments of eye contact, the trust exercises. This is about the relationship, not just the tricks. At 11:55 a.m., the pre-show music began, an orchestral piece composed specifically for Sarah and Taikuin's performances. Taikuin immediately responded, his pattern swimming stopping abruptly. He positioned himself at the far end of the pool, his massive dorsal fin, bent from years of captivity, cutting through the water as he waited. His breathing, audible even over the music, had slowed from the normal rate of 1 breath per minute to 1 every 90 seconds, a sign of intense focus in orcas. James Wright, the assistant spotter positioned on the elevated platform, noticed something odd through his binoculars. Taikuin's eyes were different, he later testified. Usually, when the show music started, he'd look excited, animated. But that day, his eyes were flat, cold. Shark's eyes. And he wasn't looking at the audience or around the pool like normal. He was locked onto the trainer entrance where Sarah would appear. At 11:58 a.m., the announcement began. The recorded voice of a child actor filled the stadium. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to OceanWorld Miami's most spectacular show. Today, you'll witness a friendship that transcends species, a bond between human and orca that will touch your hearts and blow your minds. The crowd erupted in applause. Taikuan remained motionless, waiting. Sarah appeared at exactly noon, walking onto the platform with her characteristic bright smile and energetic wave. She was wearing a wireless microphone headset, her voice carrying clearly across the stadium. "Hello, Miami. Are you ready to meet my best friend?" The crowd roared approval. Sarah continued with the scripted introduction she'd given hundreds of times. "Taikuan and I have been partners for 3 incredible years. Today, we want to share with you the magic that happens when trust runs deeper than the ocean itself." What Sarah didn't know was that maintenance worker Carlos Mendoza had noticed something disturbing during his final safety check at 11:45. The metal grating at the bottom of the medical pool, which connected to the main performance tank via an underwater channel, had been damaged. Deep gouges, consistent with orca teeth marks, suggested Taikuan had spent part of the night trying to access the medical pool where training equipment, including Sarah's personal items, were stored. Mendoza tried to radio Thompson but couldn't get through. The radio channels were being kept clear for the show coordination. At 12:02 p.m., Sarah began the opening routine. She knelt at the pool's edge and slapped the water 3 times, Taikuan's cue to approach. The orca glided forward with deceptive grace, his 12,000-pound body moving through the water like silk. He stopped precisely 3 feet from the platform as trained, and opened his massive jaws in what the audience interpreted as a smile. Sarah reached out and touched his rostrum, the front of his head, a gesture of greeting they'd performed countless times. But those close enough to see noticed Sarah's hand was trembling. Dr. Patricia Hemworth, an animal behaviorist attending the show for research purposes, was seated in the 3rd row with a clear view of the interaction. She later testified, "The orca's approach was different from videos I'd studied of previous shows. Usually, Taikuan would surface with enthusiasm, creating a small splash. This time, he surfaced like a submarine, slow, controlled, predatory. And when Sarah touched him, he didn't respond with the usual vocal acknowledgement. He was silent, completely silent." At 12:04 p.m., Sarah stood and moved to position 2, approximately 6 feet from the pool edge, to begin the behavioral demonstration portion of the show. She explained to the audience how orcas use echolocation, how they communicate through complex vocalizations, how their intelligence rivals that of great apes. As she spoke, Taikuan began to move. Not in the choreographed pattern they'd rehearsed, but in a slow, deliberate circle, his eye never leaving Sarah. Marcus Thompson noticed immediately. He stepped closer to the emergency equipment, his hand moving to the CO2 canister on his belt. Through his earpiece, he heard the show coordinator, Patricia Wells, whisper, "What's Taikuan doing?" "That's not the routine." Thompson responded quietly, "Stand by. Sarah's adjusting." But Sarah wasn't adjusting, she was frozen. For 3 seconds that felt like hours, she stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on Taikuan as he continued his unauthorized movement. Then, with remarkable composure, she smiled brighter and ad-libbed, "Look at Taikuan showing off. He's so excited to see you all today that he's making up his own routine." The audience laughed and applauded. Taikuan continued circling. At 12:06 p.m., Sarah attempted to regain control. She blew the high-pitched recall whistle, a sound that meant return to station, and was followed by a food reward. Taikuan ignored it. She blew it again, longer this time. The orca's only response was to narrow his circle, moving closer to the platform. Professional trainer Michael Rodriguez, watching from the staff area, grabbed his radio, Code yellow, code yellow. This meant an animal was not responding to commands but wasn't yet dangerous. The National Geographic cameras captured what happened next in high definition. Sarah, maintaining her performance smile, reached for the emergency food bucket, a last resort to regain an orca's attention. She threw 3 large salmon into the water at the far end of the pool, away from the audience. Taikuin didn't even glance at them. Instead, he stopped directly in front of Sarah and rose vertically out of the water in a spy hop that brought his head 12 feet above the surface. His mouth was open, displaying rows of 3-inch teeth. The audience gasped in awe, thinking it was part of the show. They didn't notice Sarah take an involuntary step backward. At 12:07 p.m., venue photographer Lisa Chen, no relation to Sarah, was shooting rapid-fire images from the designated media position. Her camera, set to burst mode, captured 10 frames per second of what happened next. In frame 1, Taikuin is spy-hopping. In frame 2, he begins to sink back into the water. In frame 3, Sarah turns slightly toward Thompson, her mouth opening as if to speak. In frame 4, Taikuin explodes from the water in a full breach, his entire body airborne. In frame 5, Sarah is diving sideways, trying to avoid the wall of water as 12,000 pounds of orca crashes back into the pool. Frames 6 through 10 show Sarah on her hands and knees on the wet platform, her ponytail hanging loose and wet, water streaming from her face, and Taikuin already positioning himself for his next move. The audience erupted in applause and cheers, convinced they'd just witnessed an spectacular planned stunt. Sarah stood slowly, her professional smile faltering for just a moment before she forced it back into place. She raised her arms triumphantly, playing to the crowd while her eyes searched desperately for Thompson. But the senior trainer was already moving, speaking rapidly into his radio. Code red prep. All emergency personnel to positions. Do not alarm the audience. Then, at exactly 12:08 p.m. and 32 seconds, Sarah Chen made the decision that would cost her life. Instead of walking away from the pool, instead of ending the show with a graceful excuse about Taikuin being too playful today, she returned to the pool's edge. She knelt down in her signature position, her ponytail hanging forward over her shoulder, and reached out once more to touch the orca she believed loved her. Taikuin was waiting. At exactly 12:08 p.m. and 47 seconds, Taikuin moved with a speed that defied his massive size. What happened next would be analyzed frame by investigators, marine biologists, and forensic experts for years to come. The National Geographic cameras, the security footage, and dozens of tourist phones captured the horror from multiple angles, creating a comprehensive record of how quickly a performance became a predation. Sarah's hand was still extended toward the water when Taikuin surged upward. His jaws didn't target her hand, as might be expected. Instead, with precision that spoke to calculated intent, he grabbed her ponytail, that distinctive high ponytail held by her mother's jade-adorned band. The teeth, designed by evolution to grip struggling seals and sea lions, closed around the hair with exactly enough pressure to hold without immediately severing. Sarah's eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening in what witnesses described as more surprise than fear. She had 1 second to grab the pool's edge before Taikuin pulled her into his world. The orca's initial pull was almost gentle, as if testing his grip. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She didn't scream or panic. Instead, it executed the emergency protocol drilled into every trainer. Remain calm, don't resist, go limp. Make yourself boring, trainers were taught. An orca grabs you, become uninteresting. Don't struggle. Don't provide stimulation. But Taikuin wasn't seeking stimulation. He had something else in mind. Madison Hughes, the 8-year-old birthday girl in the orca costume, was seated directly in front of the attack. Her later testimony, given with the help of a child psychologist, provided crucial details. The whale pulled Sarah into the water like my dog pulls his rope toy. Sarah tried to hold on to the side, but her hand slipped. She went under, and everyone started clapping because they thought it was part of the show. But then she came back up, and her face wasn't happy anymore. She looked scared. Taikuin dragged Sarah to the center of the pool, a location that maximized his control and minimized any chance of intervention. The water was 36 feet deep there, far from any platform or edge she might grab. For the first 30 seconds, Sarah's training served her well. She remained limp, her body horizontal on the surface as Taikuin pulled her in large circles. The audience continued to applaud, though uncertainty was beginning to ripple through the crowd. This didn't look like the synchronized swimming advertised in the program. Marcus Thompson was already running along the pool's edge, CO2 canister in hand. He fired it into the water, a sharp explosive sound meant to startle. Taikuin didn't flinch. Thompson fired again, then again. The orca's only response was to dive, pulling Sarah under for the first time. The synchronized timer on the security footage shows she was submerged for 18 seconds. When she surfaced, gasping, her performance smile was gone, replaced by raw terror. Dr. Patricia Hemworth, the animal behaviorist in the third row, immediately recognized what was happening. She stood up and shouted, "This is not part of the show. That animal is attacking." Her words were initially lost in the confusion, but they triggered a wave of realization. Parents began grabbing their children, covering their eyes. Some ran for the exits. Others remained frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. Underwater cameras captured Sarah's desperate attempts to free herself. Her hands clawed at her ponytail, trying to release the band, but Taikuin's grip and the water pressure made it impossible. The jade stones her mother had given her glinted in the refracted sunlight as she struggled. Her lungs, trained through years of diving, held out remarkably well. But human lungs weren't designed for what Taikuin had planned. The orca began what marine biologists call a shake and thrash behavior, the technique orcas use to disorient and drown prey. He whipped his massive head side to side, Sarah's body following like a rag doll. The G-forces alone would have been overwhelming. Witnesses described seeing Sarah's arms and legs flailing helplessly, completely at the mercy of physics and Taikuin's will. National Geographic producer Jennifer Blackwood would later testify, "I've filmed predators in the wild for 20 years. Lions, crocodiles, sharks. What Taikuin did to Sarah was exactly what I've seen wild orcas do to seals. It was predation, pure and simple." At 12:10 p.m., after Sarah had been in the water for 90 seconds, OceanWorld's emergency protocols fully activated. The announcement system blared, "Ladies and gentlemen, please evacuate the stadium immediately. This is not a drill." But many audience members couldn't move, transfixed by the horror unfolding before them. Security guards had to physically escort people out, some of whom were recording on their phones even as they sobbed. Trainer Beth Williams had grabbed the emergency pole, a 20-foot aluminum rod with a hook designed to provide something for a distressed trainer to grab. She extended it toward Sarah during one of Taikuin's surface intervals. Sarah saw it, reached for it with desperate hope, her fingers actually grazing the metal. But Taikuin saw it too. With what investigators would later describe as deliberate malice, he pulled Sarah away from the pole and dove deeper than he'd gone before. The pool's underwater viewing windows showed Taikuin descending to nearly 30 feet, Sarah still gripped by her hair. The pressure at that depth would have been crushing her eardrums, her sinuses screaming in pain. But worse was the burning in her lungs. She'd now been underwater for 45 seconds of this dive. Her body's automatic response kicked in, the mammalian dive reflex slowing her heart rate, shunting blood to vital organs. But she wasn't a marine mammal. She was a 28-year-old woman who needed air. James Wright, watching through binoculars from the elevated platform, provided crucial testimony about what happened next. Sarah stopped, struggling at about the 50-second mark. Her body went limp, but not the trained limp from before. This was different. Unconscious. That's when Taikuin brought her back up. Indeed, the orca surfaced with Sarah at exactly 12 hours 11 minutes and 43 seconds, holding her at the surface as if displaying his prize. Sarah's body was motionless, her face a disturbing shade of blue. Emergency diver Thomas Chen, also no relation, had suited up and was preparing to enter the water, a violation of every safety protocol but the only option left. Before he could jump, Taikuan did something that haunts witnesses to this day. He released Sarah's ponytail and nudged her body, with his rostrum almost gently, toward the pool's edge. Then he backed away, sinking until only his eyes remained above water, watching. Thomas Chen and Marcus Thompson pulled Sarah onto the platform at 12 hours 12 minutes and 15 seconds. She wasn't breathing. Her pulse was barely detectable. Paramedic Janet Morrison, who had been stationed at the park, immediately began CPR. Her chest compressions were forceful, professional, desperate. Water poured from Sarah's lungs with each compression. Morrison would later say it was more water than she'd ever seen in a drowning victim. As the medical team worked frantically on Sarah, Taikuan remained perfectly still in the center of the pool, watching. Several witnesses reported the same chilling detail. The ORCA appeared to be studying the resuscitation efforts with the same intensity he'd shown while stalking Sarah. Dr. Visser, who reviewed the footage, would later write, the ORCA's behavior post-attack was not consistent with play or accident. He observed the consequences of his actions with what can only be described as satisfaction. At 12 hours 13 minutes and 22 seconds, Sarah Chen coughed, expelled more water, and took a ragged breath. She was alive, but barely. Her eyes were unfocused, her body seizing from oxygen deprivation. As the paramedics prepared to move her to the ambulance, she managed to speak 3 words that multiple witnesses heard clearly. He knew. Planned. The medical team transferred Sarah to a stretcher and began rushing her toward the ambulance. The last image captured by the National Geographic cameras before they were ordered to stop filming showed Taikuan finally moving from his position. He swam to where Sarah's blood had mixed with the pool water, and in a behavior that marine biologists still debate, he vocalized a long, low-frequency call that vibrated through the stadium. Some experts interpret it as a contact call, the sound orcas make to locate pod members. Others, including Dr. Visser, believe it was something else entirely. In my opinion, that was a triumph call. He had accomplished exactly what he intended. Security footage from the ambulance loading area shows Sarah being lifted into the vehicle at 12:15 p.m. She was conscious but clearly in critical condition. Her wetsuit had been cut away to allow for medical intervention. The ponytail that had nearly killed her was gone, roughly cut by paramedics to free her from any risk of further entanglement. Her mother's jade hairband, that precious gift, lay forgotten on the pool deck, its silver surface now tarnished with blood and chlorinated water. The ambulance doors closed, the sirens wailed, and Sarah Chen began her final journey away from the place where she'd found her greatest joy and met her almost fate. Behind them, in a pool now empty of trainers and surrounded by abandoned stadium seats littered with spilled drinks and forgotten souvenirs, Taikuan floated alone. He would remain there, mostly motionless, for the next 6 hours, occasionally spy-hopping to look at the empty platforms where humans had once stood. Staff watching from a safe distance reported that he repeatedly returned to the spot where he had grabbed Sarah, circling it slowly, as if reliving the moment. Whether this was triumph, confusion, or something else entirely, only Taikuan knew. At 12:15 p.m., the ambulance carrying Sarah Chen tore out of OceanWorld Miami's employee exit, sirens piercing the humid afternoon air. Inside, paramedics Janet Morrison and David Rodriguez worked with desperate efficiency. Sarah was in critical condition, her oxygen saturation hovering at 82%, her pupils unequally dilated indicating potential brain injury, and her body temperature dropping rapidly from prolonged submersion in the 68-degree pool water. Morrison maintained the 4-line while Rodriguez continued administering high-flow oxygen, but Sarah's breathing remained labored, gurgling with each exhale. Back at the stadium, chaos had been replaced by eerie efficiency. OceanWorld's crisis response team, a unit that had trained for this exact scenario but hoped never to use their skills, took control. Security Chief Michael Brennan established a perimeter, ensuring no civilians remained in danger zones while preserving the scene for investigators. The entire park wasn't evacuated, a decision that would later draw criticism, but all ORCA shows were immediately cancelled, and the stadium was sealed off with yellow tape that seemed incongruous against the cheerful blue and white paint of the visitor areas. Wildlife Control Officer Sandra Hutchinson arrived at 12:28 p.m. with a specialized team trained in large marine mammal incidents. Her first priority was securing Taikuan, who remained in the main pool, occasionally vocalizing with long, mournful calls that echoed across the empty stadium. Couldn't just leave him there, Hutchinson later explained. A 12,000-pound orca that had just attacked was unpredictable. But we also couldn't approach him. He was in what we call a heightened state, pupils dilated, rapid breathing, aggressive posturing when anyone came within 50 feet of the pool. The decision was made to use the hydraulic gates to guide Taikuan into the medical pool, a smaller enclosure where he could be monitored more safely. But Taikuan refused to move. When trainers attempted to use his recall signals from behind protective barriers, he spy-hopped and displayed his teeth, a clear threat. It would take 4 hours and the arrival of Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a cetacean behavioral specialist from the National Marine Fisheries Service, before Taikuan finally moved to the medical pool, and only after all humans had retreated from sight. Meanwhile, the ambulance carrying Sarah had radioed ahead to Jackson Memorial Hospital's trauma center. Dr. William Foster, head of emergency medicine, assembled a specialized team including neurologists, pulmonologists, and trauma surgeons. We knew from the initial reports that this wasn't a typical drowning, Dr. Foster later testified. The victim had been subjected to massive mechanical forces while oxygen deprived. We were prepared for everything from severe whiplash to potential severing of the spinal cord. Sarah arrived at Jackson Memorial at 12:31 p.m. The trauma bay erupted into controlled chaos as medical professionals swarmed around her. Gurney. Initial assessment revealed the extent of her injuries: severe whiplash with potential cervical spine damage, bilateral pneumothorax, collapsed lungs from the pressure changes, multiple contusions consistent with crush injuries, and most critically, signs of hypoxic brain injury from oxygen deprivation. Her scalp, where Taikuan had gripped her hair, showed deep lacerations and significant tissue damage. In some places, the force had been so intense that hair follicles had been torn from the scalp entirely. Back at OceanWorld, investigators from multiple agencies were arriving. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, sent a rapid response team led by Inspector Catherine Walsh. The United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, which oversees marine mammal facilities, dispatched their own investigators. Miami-Dade Police Department's Major Crimes Unit also responded, as there were potential criminal negligence charges to consider. The scene became a complex web of jurisdictions and competing interests. Marcus Thompson, still in his wet trainer's uniform, was immediately sequestered for questioning. His hands shook as he recounted the events to OSHA Inspector Walsh. "I should have called it off," he said repeatedly. "When Taikuan didn't respond to the first recall whistle, I should have evacuated everyone. But Sarah, she had this way of making you believe everything would be okay. She'd pulled off miracles with that orca before. I thought, God, I thought she could do it again." The other orcas at OceanWorld were showing signs of extreme distress. Nalani, the matriarch, was ramming her head against the gate separating her from the stadium pool, vocalizing in patterns marine biologists had never recorded before. The younger orcas huddled in the furthest corner of their enclosure, refusing to eat. Dr. Martinez noted, the entire pod was traumatized. Whether they understood what Taikuan had done or were simply responding to the chaos and fear pheromones in the water, we'll never know. But their behavior suggested they knew something terrible had happened. At 1:45 p.m., Sarah's family arrived at Jackson Memorial. Her parents, Michael and Linda Chen, had been at their restaurant when they received the call. Security footage from the hospital showed them running through the emergency department doors, Chen clutching a photo of Sarah, the same photo that would later appear on news broadcasts worldwide. They were met by Dr. Foster and hospital chaplain Father Thomas O'Brien, whose presence immediately conveyed the gravity of the situation. Sarah was in surgery, Dr. Foster explained. The immediate priority was relieving pressure on her brain from swelling caused by oxygen deprivation. Her lungs were being artificially ventilated. Her cervical spine showed hairline fractures that, miraculously, hadn't severed her spinal cord. She's fighting, Dr. Foster told the family. But the next 24 hours are critical. We need to prepare for all possibilities. Back at OceanWorld, the investigation was revealing disturbing details. OSHA Inspector Walsh discovered that 3 previous incident reports involving tycoon and aggressive behavior had been downgraded from serious to minor in the official records. Emails showed pressure from corporate management to minimize any documentation that could affect the park's safety rating or insurance premiums. One email from Thomas Brandenburg, dated just a week before the attack, explicitly stated, "Remember, aggressive behavior is to be documented as high-energy play, unless actual contact with injury occurs." The park's veterinary team, led by Dr. Robert Kellman, was tasked with examining tycoon. Blood samples were drawn using a specialized pole syringe. No one would enter the water with him now. The results would later show elevated testosterone and cortisol levels consistent with extreme stress and aggression. But more disturbing was what they found in his stomach contents when they convinced him to regurgitate for examination. Pieces of metal grating from the pool fixtures, chunks of concrete from the tank walls, and disturbingly, what appeared to be fabric. From a trainer's wetsuit, not Sarah's, but from some previous, unreported incident. As news of the attack spread, crowds began gathering outside both the hospital and OceanWorld. Animal rights activists arrived with signs reading, "Free tycoon" and "Captivity kills," while others demanded the orca be euthanized. The hospital had to establish a separate family entrance to shield the Chens from media scrutiny. OceanWorld's public relations team, led by communications director Patricia Holden, struggled to craft a response that balanced legal liability with public outrage. At 3:30 p.m., Sarah emerged from surgery. The operation had successfully relieved the cranial pressure, but she remained in a medically induced coma. Her fiancé, Robert Park, had arrived and refused to leave her bedside. He held her hand, careful to avoid the 4 lines, and spoke to her continuously, telling her about their wedding plans, about the future they discussed, about anything except orcas and the sea. The Miami-Dade Police Department's investigation took a darker turn when they reviewed Sarah's personal effects from her locker. They found a letter she'd written but never sent, dated August 14th, the day before the attack. It was addressed to OceanWorld's corporate management. "I can no longer in good conscience continue performing with tycoon. Something has changed in him, or perhaps I'm finally seeing what was always. These animals should not be in captivity. They're too intelligent, too complex, too wild. I request immediate reassignment and recommend tycoon be retired from public performances pending behavioral assessment. I fear someone will get hurt. It might be me." This letter, which Sarah had apparently decided not to send, would become crucial evidence in the lawsuits that followed. To prove she knew the danger but felt pressured to continue. Her laptop browser history showed she'd been researching other jobs, marine sanctuaries, and, disturbingly, survivor accounts from previous orca attacks in captivity. As evening fell on August 15th, the immediate emergency response phase was ending, but the consequences were just beginning to unfold. Tycoon remained isolated in the medical pool, floating motionless except for necessary breathing. Sarah lay unconscious in the ICU machines, keeping her alive while her brain swelling slowly subsided. OceanWorld's executives held emergency meetings with lawyers, preparing for the storm of litigation and public relations disasters ahead. And across social media, Videos of the attack were being shared millions of times, each share accompanied by debates about captivity, entertainment, and the price of human arrogance in the face of nature's apex predators. Sarah Chen survived the initial attack, but her life would never be the same. After 72 hours in a medically induced coma, she was gradually brought back to consciousness on August 18. The first thing she said, according to ICU nurse Maria Velasquez, was a single word: Tycoon. When told the orca was alive and contained, Sarah closed her eyes and didn't speak again for 2 days. The neurological damage was significant but not catastrophic. She could move all her limbs, though her left side showed marked weakness. Her speech was slurred but comprehensible. Most devastating was the cognitive impact: short-term memory loss, difficulty processing complex information, and what neuropsychologist Dr. Amanda Rivers described as severe PTSD with aquatic-specific triggers. The physical injuries would heal, mostly. The lacerations on her scalp left permanent bald patches where hair follicles had been destroyed. Her neck bore the scars of severe whiplash that would require years of physical therapy. The partial hearing loss in her left ear from the pressure changes was permanent, but it was the invisible wounds that cut deepest. Sarah would never again be able to hear running water without panicking. The sound of children playing in pools would send her into hyperventilation. Even watching ocean documentaries became impossible. Tycoon's fate became an international controversy. Within hours of the attack, online petitions both demanding his release to a sea sanctuary and calling for his euthanization gathered millions of signatures. OceanWorld initially announced he would never perform again but would remain at the facility for behavioral study. This decision satisfied no one. Animal rights organizations filed immediate lawsuits demanding his release, while public safety advocates argued he was too dangerous to remain alive. Dr. Ingrid Visser flew in from New Zealand to assess Tycoon. Her report was damning not just of OceanWorld but of the entire marine entertainment industry. Tycoon is not a rogue orca, she wrote. He is the inevitable result of keeping an apex predator with a brain capable of emotional suffering in a concrete box for 22 years. His attack on Sarah Chen was not an aberration, it was a predictable outcome that multiple experts warned about. The question isn't why did Tycoon attack, but why didn't it happen sooner? The investigation revealed a pattern of negligence that went to the highest levels of OceanWorld's corporate structure. Internal documents subpoenaed by OSHA showed that executives had explicitly decided to continue shows despite 5 separate expert warnings about Tycoon's deteriorating mental state. More damaging was the discovery of a risk assessment report from insurance adjusters that had calculated the statistical probability of a trainer death at 1 in 47 over a 5-year period, a report that was hidden from trainers and the public. On September 3, 2019, Thomas Brandenburg, OceanWorld's vice president of operations, was arrested on charges of reckless endangerment and criminal negligence. The arrest happened at his Coral Gables mansion at 6 a.m., with news cameras capturing him being led away in handcuffs. He would later accept a plea deal for 18 months in minimum security prison and a lifetime ban from working with marine mammals. During his sentencing, he read a prepared statement. "I believed we were giving these animals a good life while educating the public. I see now that I was willfully blind to the suffering we caused and the danger we created." The Chen family filed a $50 million lawsuit against OceanWorld and its parent company, Leisure Entertainment Incorporated. The lawsuit alleged gross negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of workplace safety standards. Sarah's medical bills alone had exceeded $3 million, with lifetime care estimated at $15 million more. But the family insisted the lawsuit wasn't about money. "We want them to empty the tanks," Michael Chen told reporters outside the courthouse. "No family should go through what we've experienced. These creatures belong in the ocean, not performing tricks for tourists." OceanWorld Miami closed permanently on October 15, 2019, exactly 2 months after the attack. The final day was surreal. Hundreds of Employees losing their jobs, protesters celebrating outside the gates, and the ORCA vocalizing continuously as if they sensed the change coming. The park that had entertained millions over 40 years died not with a bang but with a whimper, its gift shop items sold at 90% off, its restaurant freezers emptied, its massive parking lots suddenly and forever empty. The 5 orcas at the facility, including Taikuan, were transferred to a temporary holding facility while their fate was debated in court. Matriarch died 3 weeks after the transfer. Veterinarians said it was from a bacterial infection, but many believed she simply gave up. Her death sparked renewed urgency in finding solutions for the remaining orcas. Eventually, an unprecedented partnership between marine organizations and tech billionaire Thomas Whitman funded the creation of a sea sanctuary in Nova Scotia, where the orcas could live in netted ocean coves, still captive, but in real seawater with tides and fish and space to dive. Taikuan never made it to the sanctuary. On December 3, 2019, he was found dead in his holding tank. The necropsy revealed he had been suffering from multiple health issues masked by the constant medication given to captive orcas, severe dental damage from chewing concrete walls, kidney disease from decades of dehydration, and stress-induced ulcers throughout his digestive system. But the official cause of death was drowning. The orca, capable of holding his breath for up to 45 minutes, had apparently chosen not to surface. Marine biologists debate whether orcas can commit suicide, but those who knew Taikuan believed he made a choice. Sarah's recovery was painstaking and incomplete. She spent 6 months in rehabilitation facilities, relearning basic motor skills, fighting through the fog of traumatic brain injury. Her fiancé Robert never left her side, eventually quitting his job to become her full-time caregiver. They married in a small ceremony on June 15, 2020, with Sarah in a wheelchair, her speech still halting but her eyes clear as she said her vows. She wore her hair short now, the scars on her scalp hidden under a delicate veil her mother had embroidered with jade thread. The attack's impact rippled throughout the marine entertainment industry. SeaWorld announced the permanent end of orca breeding programs and the phasing out of theatrical shows. Marine parks across the world faced protests, boycotts, and legislative challenges. The Taikuan effect, as economists called it, saw marine park attendance drop 60% globally within a year. Several countries, including Canada and France, banned keeping cetaceans in captivity for entertainment purposes. Sarah found an unexpected purpose in her tragedy. Despite her injuries, she began speaking at conferences about marine mammal captivity, her halting speech and visible scars lending undeniable authority to her words. She testified before Congress in support of the ORCA Act, ORCA, Responsibility and Care Advancement Act, which would phase out orca captivity in the United States. Her testimony, delivered with Roberts' support as she struggled through neurological episodes, moved several legislators to tears. The security footage and National Geographic documentation of the attack became standard training materials for marine facilities worldwide. Every frame was analyzed to identify warning signs, improve emergency responses, and most importantly, to understand the true nature of keeping apex predators in captivity. The footage was never released to the public at the Chen family's request, though bootleg copies circulated on the dark web, each viewing a violation of Sarah's dignity and privacy. OceanWorld's abandoned facility became a ghostly monument to human hubris. Urban explorers who illegally entered the property reported that the pool still echoed with phantom sounds, mechanical filtration systems long since shut down seeming to run, splashes where no water moved. The stadium where Sarah nearly died was colonized by seabirds, their cries echoing in the empty stands. The city council debated for 2 years before finally approving demolition. When the wrecking balls came in March 2022, Sarah watched from her apartment balcony 5 miles away, tears streaming down her scarred face. The financial consequences extended far beyond lawsuits and closures. The entire marine entertainment industry restructured, with insurance premiums for facilities with marine mammals increasing by 400%. Stock prices for entertainment conglomerates with marine park holdings plummeted. Leisure Entertainment Incorporated declared bankruptcy in 2021, its assets liquidated to pay settlements to Sarah and other injured trainers from various incidents that came to light during investigations. But perhaps the most profound consequence was the shift in public consciousness. Children who once dreamed of becoming marine trainers now studied marine conservation. The phrase, swimming with dolphins, transformed from a bucket list item to a controversial tourism practice. Marine biology programs reported a surge in students interested in studying cetaceans in the wild rather than in captivity. Sarah Chen's attack had achieved what decades of activism couldn't. It made the cost of entertainment impossible to ignore. Dr. Naomi Blackwood, who has studied orca behavior for 32 years and observed over 300 wild orcas across 3 continents, analyzed every frame of the Tycoon attack footage for the federal investigation. Her conclusion was unequivocal. This was not play behavior gone wrong. This was not a trainer error. This was predation. Tycoon exhibited the exact sequence of behaviors I've documented in wild orcas hunting seals. The patient stalking, the precision grab targeting a specific body part that maximized control, the shake and thrash technique, and most tellingly, the repeated dunking to induce drowning. The only difference was that Tycoon stopped before the kill. Whether from confusion, satisfaction, or some remnant of training, we'll never know. Dr. Blackwood's analysis identified 17 distinct warning behaviors in the 3 hours of footage before the attack. Tycoon's respiratory rate had increased from the normal 2 to 3 breaths per minute to 5 to 6, indicating heightened arousal. His eye tracking showed what researchers call target fixation, the unblinking focus predators display before striking. Most chilling was his deliberate positioning throughout the show. Computer modeling of his movements showed he consistently placed himself at angles that maximized his strike range while minimizing Sarah's escape. He was playing chess while everyone thought they were playing checkers, Dr. Blackwood explained. The neurological impact on Sarah was studied extensively by Dr. Marcus Thompson from Johns Hopkins, one of the world's leading experts on hypoxic brain injury. Sarah's brain was deprived of oxygen for cumulative periods totaling approximately 3 minutes, he testified. But it wasn't just the duration, it was the repeated hypoxia reoxygenation cycles that caused unique damage. Each time Tycoon brought her up and took her down, her brain experienced what we call reperfusion injury. It's similar to what we see in torture victims subjected to repeated near drowning. The hippocampus, crucial for memory formation, showed significant scarring. The amygdala, which processes fear and emotion, was hyperactive. Sarah's brain had literally been rewired by trauma. Dr. Thompson's team used advanced fMRI scanning to map Sarah's brain activity. When shown images of ocean life, even cartoon fish, her amygdala lit up like a Christmas tree, flooding her system with stress hormones. The damage to her temporal lobe affected her ability to process sequential information, making complex tasks like following recipes or driving routes nearly impossible. The tragic irony, Dr. Thompson noted, is that the same neuroplasticity that allowed Sarah to form such strong bonds with marine animals made her brain more vulnerable to trauma-induced reorganization. Forensic biomechanics expert Dr. Jennifer Walsh reconstructed the physical forces Sarah endured during the attack. Using the video footage and computer modeling, she calculated that Tycoon's thrashing subjected Sarah's neck to forces exceeding 4,000 pounds per square inch, equivalent to a high-speed car crash. The human neck is remarkably resilient, but it wasn't designed for this, Dr. Walsh explained. Sarah experienced rotational forces that would normally cause instant paralysis or death. The only reason she survived was the water's buoyancy providing some support and Tycoon's grip on her hair actually stabilizing her skull-spine connection. Paradoxically, the very thing attacking her also prevented her neck from snapping. Dr. Robert Freeman, a forensic psychologist specializing in human-animal interactions, examined the psychological dynamics between Sarah and Tycoon. His analysis was controversial but compelling. Sarah exhibited what we call specialist blindness, expertise becoming a liability. Knew orca behavior so well that she began interpreting warning signs through the lens of her emotional attachment rather than objective observation. When Taikuan displayed aggression, she saw a cry for help. When he showed predatory interest, she interpreted it as affection. Isn't stupidity or negligence. It's a documented psychological phenomenon where deep knowledge creates blind spots. Dr. Freeman interviewed 43 current and former orca trainers for his analysis. A disturbing pattern emerged, nearly all reported experiencing moments of fear with their orcas that they suppressed or rationalized. There's a culture in marine training of denying danger, he explained. Admitting fear is seen as failure, as betraying the animals they claim to love. Sarah was trapped not just by Taikuan's jaws but by a psychological framework that made recognizing danger feel like betrayal. Marine acoustics specialist Dr. Patricia Young analyzed the vocalizations from all orcas present during and after the attack. Her findings revolutionized understanding of orca communication in captivity. The other orcas were producing alarm calls at frequencies we'd never recorded before, some below human hearing range. But most remarkably, they began making these calls 3 days before the attack. They knew something was coming. Whether they could sense Taikuan's state or were responding to environmental cues we don't understand, the pod was trying to warn everyone. Dr. Young's research revealed that captive orcas develop unique, prison dialects, vocalizations never heard in wild populations. These sounds, theorized, were expressions of psychological states that don't exist in the wild: chronic frustration, learned helplessness, and what she termed captivity psychosis. Taikuan's vocalizations in the week before the attack showed patterns consistent with what Dr. Young called cognitive dissolution, the breakdown of normal thought patterns under extreme chronic stress. Veterinary pathologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who performed Taikuan's necropsy, found physical evidence of long-term suffering that shocked even experienced marine mammal veterinarians. His teeth were drilled and filled multiple times to prevent infection from chronic breaking against concrete walls, a standard practice in captive orcas that we've normalized but is actually mutilation. His dorsal fin collapse wasn't just aesthetic. It indicated complete atrophy of supporting musculature from inability to swim properly. His stomach contained nearly 20 pounds of foreign objects, paint chips, metal, plastic. This is pica, a psychological disorder where stressed animals eat non-food items. Every organ showed signs of chronic stress, enlarged adrenal glands, gastric ulcers, kidney damage from dehydration. Dr. Mitchell's most disturbing finding was neurological. Taikuan's brain showed markers consistent with chronic depression and anxiety disorders. The hippocampus was shrunken, the amygdala enlarged. These are changes we see in humans with severe PTSD. This animal was profoundly mentally ill, had been for years, and we forced him to perform while suffering from the cetacean equivalent of severe psychiatric disease. Legal expert Dr. James Harrison analyzed the regulatory failures that enabled the attack. The USDA, which oversees marine mammals in captivity, had inspected OceanWorld Miami 43 times in 5 years. They never issued a single violation for Taikuan's deteriorating condition or aggressive behaviors. The inspectors, documents show, relied entirely on information provided by the park itself. Its regulatory capture at its worst, the industry essentially policing itself through agencies that lacked the expertise, resources, or will to protect either animals or humans. Dr. Harrison's review of international marine park incidents revealed that Taikuan's attack was the culmination of a pattern ignored for decades. There have been over 100 documented aggressive incidents between captive orcas and trainers since 1968. For deaths, dozens of serious injuries. Each time, the industry claimed it was an isolated incident, trainer error, or freak accident. The Sarah Chen attack finally made it impossible to maintain that fiction. The evidence was too clear, too public, too horrific to explain away. Evolutionary biologist Dr. Michael Reeves provided perhaps the most fundamental analysis. Orcas evolved over 11 million years as apex predators. With complex social structures, vast territories, and sophisticated hunting cultures. We took Earth's most intelligent predator, put it in a concrete box, and expected it to be grateful for free fish and applause. The attack on Chen wasn't a tragedy, it was an inevitability. The tragedy was that we needed someone to nearly die before we acknowledged what should have been obvious. These animals were slowly going insane. And occasionally, that insanity found a target. The cumulative expert analysis painted a clear picture. Chen's attack was predictable, preventable, and ultimately, a damning indictment of humanity's arrogance in believing we could control nature's most sophisticated predators. Every expert agreed on one point: it wasn't a question of if such an attack would happen, but when and who would pay the price for decades of willful blindness to animal suffering and human vulnerability. Chen's tragedy teaches us that love and understanding cannot overcome the fundamental reality of wild animals forced into artificial captivity. Sarah possessed more knowledge, empathy, and connection with orcas than perhaps any trainer of her generation, but her expertise became her vulnerability. She believed that her bond with Tycoon transcended the predator-prey dynamics encoded in millions of years of evolution. The attack proved that no amount of training, affection, or mutual respect can erase what an orca truly is: an apex predator with cognitive abilities that allow it to plan, remember, and choose its moment with terrifying precision. The warning signs were everywhere, screaming for attention like sirens in the night. Tycoon's deteriorating mental state, documented in reports, emails, and videos, created a timeline of inevitable disaster. He stopped eating regularly, displayed repetitive behaviors indicative of psychological distress, showed increasing aggression toward trainers, and exhibited the calculated patience of a predator studying its prey. The other orcas knew, trying to warn through their behavior and vocalizations. Experienced trainers knew, filing reports and requesting interventions. Even Sarah knew, writing in her journal about nightmares and drafting a resignation letter she never sent. Yet the show went on because acknowledging the danger meant admitting that the entire enterprise of keeping orcas in captivity was fundamentally flawed. The prevention lessons from Sarah's case are stark and uncompromising. First, large cetaceans should never be kept in captivity for entertainment. No tank, regardless of size or sophistication, can replicate the ocean's vastness or provide the psychological stimulation these intelligent beings require. Second, when animals display warning behaviors, those warnings must be heeded immediately, not rationalized or minimized for profit or prey. Third, the emotional bonds between trainers and animals, while genuine, can create dangerous blind spots where affection overrides rational risk assessment. Fourth, corporate pressure to maintain shows and profits must never override safety concerns raised by those working directly with potentially dangerous animals. Chen is remembered not as a victim but as a catalyst for change. Her near-death experience accomplished what decades of activism couldn't. It made the cost of cetacean captivity impossible to ignore or rationalize. The girl who dreamed of dancing with whales became the woman whose suffering ended that dance forever. At rehabilitation centers, she's spoken to hundreds of aspiring marine biologists, her halting speech and visible scars lending undeniable authority to her message. Love them by leaving them free. Respect them by acknowledging what they are. Honor them by keeping our worlds separate. Her legacy lives in the Chen Marine Protection Act, passed 18 months after the attack, which phases out orca captivity in the United States by 2025. It mandates that existing captive orcas be relocated to sea sanctuaries where they can live in natural seawater while receiving necessary care. The act also establishes federal funding for non-invasive wild orca research and education programs that don't require captivity. Sarah testified before Congress during the bill's hearings, her testimony interrupted 3 times by neurological episodes that required medical intervention. Each time, she insisted on continuing, determined that her suffering would lead to meaningful change. The policy changes following the attack were swift and comprehensive. OSHA implemented new regulations prohibiting water work with any marine mammal over 500 pounds. The USDA revised its inspection protocols, requiring independent behavioral assessments of all captive marine mammals quarterly. Insurance companies collectively decided to no longer cover facilities with captive cetaceans, effectively making such operations financially impossible. These changes weren't just American phenomena. Countries worldwide implemented similar restrictions, creating a global shift away from cetacean entertainment. The community impact of Sarah's attack continues to ripple outward. Miami's tourism industry, heavily reliant on marine attractions, pivoted toward ecotourism and conservation experiences. Former OceanWorld employees founded the Cetacean Sanctuary Project, working to create ocean-based sanctuaries for retired performance animals. Schools that once took field trips to marine parks now organize whale watching expeditions and virtual reality experiences that show orcas in their natural habitat. The transformation from exploitation to education happened remarkably quickly, driven by public revulsion at what happened to Sarah. The investigation revealed that at least 12 trainers had experienced similar but non-fatal incidents with Tycoon in the 2 years before Sarah's. These incidents were documented in internal reports but never reported to regulatory agencies or made public. This pattern of concealment extended throughout the industry, a conspiracy of silence that prioritized profit over safety. Every one of these hidden incidents was a missed opportunity to prevent Sarah's trauma. The lesson is clear: transparency about animal aggression isn't betrayal or weakness, it's essential for preventing tragedy. Dr. Ingrid Visser's final assessment remains the definitive statement on prevention. If you want to work with orcas, get a degree in marine biology, buy good binoculars, and watch them from shore or boat. The only safe orca is a wild orca observed from a respectful distance. The moment we convince ourselves we can control or tame these animals, we've already lost. Sarah Chen nearly paid with her life for our collective delusion that intelligence equals domestication. The financial cost of the attack exceeded $500 million when combining lawsuits, closures, industry restructuring, and sanctuary development. But the human cost was immeasurable. Sarah's parents aged visibly during her recovery, her father closing the restaurant to care for his daughter full. Her brother David left his job to manage Sarah's medical care and advocacy work. Robert Park, her husband, developed severe anxiety and depression from the trauma of nearly losing his fiancée and becoming her caregiver. The ripple effects of trauma spread through families, communities, and an entire industry forced to confront its fundamental premises. Today, Sarah Chen lives quietly in a cottage in Oregon, as far from the ocean as she could manage while remaining on the coast she once loved. She continues her advocacy work through video conferences and written testimony, though travel remains difficult due to her injuries. Writing a book, typing slowly with her right hand while her left remains weakened, about her experiences and the complex grief of losing not just her career but her entire identity. "I mourn the girl who believed she could speak whale," she wrote in a recent blog post. "But I'm grateful for the woman who survived to warn others that some languages aren't meant for human tongues." The abandoned OceanWorld Miami site was eventually transformed into the Chen Marine Education Center, funded by the settlement money Sarah donated rather than keeping. The center features state-of-the-art virtual reality systems that allow visitors to experience orcas in the wild without disrupting them. The pool where Sarah was attacked has been converted into a reflection garden, with a memorial plaque that reads, "In memory of those who suffered in silence, human and cetacean alike. May we learn from our arrogance and choose wisdom over wonder, respect over entertainment." Tycoon's story ended in that holding tank, but his impact continues. Marine biologists study his case as a textbook example of captivity-induced psychosis. His brain, preserved for research, shows the neurological scars of 22 years in a concrete prison. Some see him as a victim, others as a killer, but perhaps he was both, a magnificent predator driven to violence by the slow torture of confinement, acting out the only way. His damaged psyche could express its anguish. The final lesson from Sarah Chen's story is that proximity doesn't equal understanding, and love doesn't equal control. We wanted to believe that. These intelligent, social creatures could be our partners in entertainment, that mutual affection could bridge the gap between species. But orcas aren't dogs with fins. They're self-aware beings with their own cultures, languages, and imperatives that we barely understand. Sarah loved Taikuin, and in whatever way his traumatized mind could process emotion, perhaps he felt something for her too. But love couldn't overcome what captivity had broken in him, and trust couldn't protect her when instinct finally overruled training. Share this story not for sensation but for education. Share it so no other young woman with dreams of dancing with whales ends up drowning in those dreams. Share it so the remaining captive orcas worldwide might finally find freedom in sea sanctuaries. Share it because Sarah Chen, despite everything she's lost, wants her story to protect others. She survived when statistics said she shouldn't have, and she's chosen to use that survival to ensure no one else faces what she faced in those terrifying minutes when her best friend became her predator. If you've watched this far, you've witnessed the true cost of keeping Earth's most intelligent predators in swimming pools for our amusement. Subscribe to this channel for more critical investigations into human-animal interactions, but more importantly, support organizations working to empty the tanks and create sanctuaries for retired performance animals. Visit the Chen Marine Education Center's website to learn how you can support the Cetacean Sanctuary Project. Choose whale watching over whale shows. Remember that the most profound respect we can show these magnificent creatures is to leave them where they belong, in the vast, wild ocean where no human will ever truly speak their language and where they need never speak ours. Remember Sarah Chen not as the girl who was attacked by an orca, but as the woman whose suffering ended an era of exploitation. Remember Taikuin not as a monster, but as a broken soul whose violence was the product of our cruelty. Remember that every ticket bought, every show attended, every photo taken with a captive orca contributed to this tragedy. And remember that we have the power to ensure it never happens again. Sarah Chen's story isn't just about one woman and one orca. It's about the price of entertainment, the cost of captivity, and the moment when humanity finally understood that some boundaries between human and nature should never be crossed. The tanks are emptying now, the shows are ending, and somewhere in a sanctuary in Nova Scotia, 3 surviving orcas from OceanWorld Miami swim in real seawater for the first time in their lives, their calls echoing across the bay, not performing, just being. That's Sarah Chen's true legacy, not the attack that nearly killed her, but the freedom that her suffering brought to others. The girl who wanted to speak whale finally delivered a message both species could understand. Some distances are meant to be maintained, some wildness is meant to remain untamed, and some love is best expressed by letting go.